Greetings, cyberspace, and welcome to episode 5 of the Double Density Podcast with your hosts, Brian and Angelo. You know, Angelo, if our podcast was a child, you and I would have already had the discussion about where it's going to school by this stage.
It's true. We're 5 years old?
Yeah.
Well, 5 years. 5 weeks.
I mean, five rotations of podcast.
Yeah, in podcast years, we're 5.
Thank you for destroying my metaphor.
I totally ruined that.
I really appreciate you being a dream killer.
I think it's the heat that's getting to me.
Right, because it is, it's not unseasonably warm. It's warmer than usual for this time of year, but I'm into it.
It's fine.
So we have a full slate of things we're going to talk about this week, including the first thing is that something that someone around you has noticed about the way I interact with you.
My wife was asking me the other day when she was listening to one of our podcasts, why you keep calling me bro. So I said it's more sarcastically than anything else. It's kind of an affectation you've taken on, sort of how H3 Ethan's Papa Bless that he keeps saying all the time. I think he used to say it as a joke and now it just comes out.
So the last 2 times I remember calling you bro was in reference to rods and cutting in and suggesting that chupacabras were responsible for something. And so, yeah, it definitely is a very sarcastic way that I address you.
But she was wondering. I think she kind of heard it more than you actually said it. It's sort of how you know how everybody thinks people act crazy during the full moon and it's more a sort of confirmation bias. So that's sort of how it was. She kept hearing you say bro, but you actually only said it a few times.
I guess I should start calling you bro more often or less often, given these facts.
It doesn't matter. It'll just be a bro confirmation bias anyway.
Speaking of things that are done or misreported or misrepresented, earlier this week there was this whole thing about the MP3 being dead, right? So around the blogosphere, people were posting stories about how the format is dead, but it's actually not dead, right?
It'll actually be better, right? From what I've seen, it's not that the MP3 is dead. It's that the last company that owned the patent on it, the licensing, they've kind of declared the license gone, right? So now anybody can just do what they want with an MP3 because it's so old at this point. And as Marco Arment pointed out on his blog, he says it's actually better that the MP3 is free and open like this. And as a developer of one of the best podcasting apps, he kind of knows what he's talking about. Apparently, he said that 99% of the podcasts that he's gone through in his
so it's the top 500 are MP3s.
The top 500, yeah. I think he said 99% of them are MP3s.
Yeah, and of his whole database, 92 MP3s, and of the top 599.
That's insane.
I mean, yeah, it's this weird kind of misreporting because the format itself isn't going anywhere. If anything, as you're saying, it's better. You can do what you want with it. You can modify it. You can play around with it. And you can sort of see if you can come on with improvements of it, right? So a while back, I mean, there were, over the past 15 years, let's say there are a bunch of other formats, right? So AAC, Ogg-Vorbis, FLAC, but FLAC doesn't really count because it's not a compressed
That's lossless?
file format. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are all of these have sort of popped up, but unfortunately the big problem, as pointed out in the article that you have posted, there is a compatibility issue with a lot of the different apps that support audio, right? So MP3 is pretty much your baseline, your de facto go-to file format for anything audio versus something like Ogg-Vorbis or an AAC even, because, Apple was using the AAC for iTunes for a while.
They still do, I think. Apple Music streams AAC, which is actually good for streaming, right? It's a little more efficient than an MP3 would be streaming. You can get a better quality at a lower bit rate from the way I understand it, right?
Right, and the same thing with Spotify, who I think they use Ogg-Vorbis too. I could be wrong.
That's such a weird name, right? That sounds like something we should be discussing in our paranormal segment.
I mean, Alien Covenant is coming out this week, so we're dating the podcast. So yeah, maybe it has a tie-in with that.
Well, yeah, we
somewhere.
already dated it by talking about this article and saying it happened this week, right?
Right.
But the nice thing about our show is that it's, I'd like to think that the things we discuss are more evergreen because we don't really spend too much time on the news. We kind of pick up stuff that's happening in the news. We sort of talk about it in our own way, right? And relate our own little fun stories to it.
And as I was mentioning before, the funny thing is that there's uncompressed file formats like FLAC, right? So FLAC really hit it big, strangely enough, with the Grateful Dead bootleg trading community. So if you go on archive.org, it's like the largest hub of sort of gray area FLAC files available to anyone.
Isn't it nice that people nowadays can just go online and find all their favorite bootlegs? Back in our day, we used to have to go to little mom and pop rock shops. And just to get a little peek behind the curtain, what do you use to distribute our podcast?
I use a variable byte rate MP3, but a lower variable byte rate. So anywhere between, I'd say 80 and like 112 kbps, really.
Well, because it's just mono, right? It's not exactly, we don't need stereo symphonic sound for a podcast of two dudes talking.
We don't need stereo, and we're not doing a music podcast, which I think would be an entirely different story unto itself. I think since it's mostly talk, it's a lot easier to do. And I mean, this is a far cry from real media files who are encoded at 32 kbps and with a lot of digital artifacting.
Oh, real media. You remember watching early streaming video, and it was extraordinarily just pixelated squares everywhere, and you kind of can make things out. I remember watching Big Brother like that in 2000.
I remember trying to find early South Park clips. So another outdated media file is the .asf file, which was the Windows format for streaming, captured streaming. So, for example, I remember I was hunting down South Park clips. So South Park was on, Matt and Trey from South Park were on Jay Leno, and they had a little bit of an animated short to show, or the Cable Ace Awards, or the did the Parrot sketch for the Comedy Central tribute to Monty Python. And so these were available in like various really crappy file formats, including .rm and .asf.
Wow. Well, I saw the original South Park cartoon of Jesus versus Santa Claus via cassette tape. My cousin showed it to me. He had a copy of it. I guess it was mid-90s, right? That it was like a weird little short that was making the rounds, and people would get a bootleg copy of the cassette tape because you couldn't really share video on the internet at this point. It was early days. I mean, that was the days of AOL Online and stuff like that. The actual web wasn't even that completely open to everybody.
So was it the first one or the second one? Because there's two of them. I don't know if you know this.
I'm pretty sure it was the first one.
Okay, because that one's Jesus versus Frosty. And the second one is Jesus versus Santa. So the first one came out in 92, and the second one came out in 95.
No, it was the one from 95.
And that's what got them the deal. So yeah, the story goes that someone had seen the first one and then gave them money to do a better second one as a Christmas card to be sent around.
It's pretty cool how they actually did that. It was an early sort of example of viral video without the viral part really being able to spread so quickly, but it still spread.
That, and it just fascinates me that like it's stop motion animation, right? So it takes a crazy amount of time to do.
Say what you will about them, they're extraordinarily talented.
Oh, for sure. I mean, despite not enjoying the last couple of seasons necessarily as much as the first 5 or 6, there's a lot to be said about the way that they work and the way that they're able to stay relevant and keep going. I mean, they're going to do season 21 in August.
It's insane that it's 20 years old, and I kind of remember the first time it was on. I was after a band practice I had, I guess in the late 90s, and we in Canada here, and it aired on Global. I can't remember where it aired in the US.
Comedy Central.
Was it always Comedy Central?
Yeah.
And then I kind of lost touch with South Park in the early 2000s. Sort of after the movie.
It used to air Wednesdays 9:30 on Global for a while, and then it got moved Fridays midnight.
Yeah, that really screwed everything up for me.
And so I would tape that, and then after that would be Mad TV.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I'm taking it real back here.
The invention of the PVR was actually a revelation for me when watching TV, because it was so inconvenient to have to make sure your tapes were ready and your VCR was programmed, and then something would always go wrong with the programming, right? And you would never get the exact thing taped. So PVRs made that a lot better. I mean, still sometimes it does screw up. My wife tried to tape Good Fight, and the PVR taped exactly 6 seconds of it.
And you never figured out why?
No, there was no rhyme or reason to it. It seemed to be set up properly, but at that point, we ended up looking for it somewhere else.
Well, clearly, you know what this is, right? It's the hacker known as 4chan doing this.
Directly to me and my house?
Absolutely.
That's where all our listeners are coming from.
Double density. Welcome back here to Double Density, and we're going to talk about something that is both nostalgic for me, yet made the news this week. So HP laptops have been discovered to currently have keyloggers installed within their drivers. And so this is an exploitable kind of thing too, and it's a very dangerous thing to have. And so some technical details did come out explaining that the logs were dumped with reboots, but it's easily circumventable, right? So anyone who has a malicious bone in their heart will figure out a way to get these keyloggers going. HP is a decidedly big company, right?
Yeah, at one point, weren't they the biggest PC manufacturer?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I if that were told to me, I wouldn't say it was crazy.
I think they were. They were one of the biggest, if not the biggest, at one point. At work, I have an HP PC desktop, though not laptop, and it's pretty bad. They were showing an example in the Ars Technica article I sent you, and it's pretty clear. You can see exactly what his password was that he typed in. It's a pretty terrible password, but that's besides the point. It's just to get an example of how it works. And
I feel like password security is something we could talk about at a later episode, but I definitely agree with you that it's easily extractable information, right?
Yeah. Oh, and the phone's ringing. Hold on a second.
Please stand by. Our host will be back soon.
Exceedingly unprofessional up in here.
Sorry. Those, the dangers of early records. I guess you can keep that whole thing in there.
Well, I keylogged the out of that.
All right. So where were we with the keylogging thing? So
to me, this is a very nostalgic thing to talk about because when I was younger, I used to visit a bunch of forums, and a lot of script kiddies used to spend a lot of their time trying to install keyloggers onto each other's computers to gain their passwords to screw with each other, right? So that was a thing that people, like 15, 20 years ago were doing for fun. And I mean, now it's for profit, right?
Well, it gets pretty dangerous, right? Because now everything we have is behind some sort of password. And like you said, we'll eventually talk about passwords and password managers, but I actually don't know most of my passwords because they're in my password manager. So I have 2 passwords that I know, but they're extraordinarily long, so they'd be pretty much impossible for anybody to guess or to brute force.
Well, the floor is yours now if you want to read them out slowly, as well as your sin.
So my passwords are P, A.
I feel like your passwords are all very narcissistic.
$.
Like Angelo is a good guy.
Yeah, no, they're not that, but you kind of know how my password scheme goes because of what the passwords are for our double density accounts. I make my passwords, and I kind of used that with our double density passwords. So a trick I learned, and I think actually Edward Snowden talked about this is the best way to make passwords, is to use 3 or 4 completely disparate words together, and maybe put some capitals or lowercase letters in them, and use that as a password. And it's pretty much impossible for anybody to guess, right?
I'd like to think that it actually wasn't Edward Snowden, but it was Captain Lou Albano in a Mario costume in a dream of yours that told you to do this as like a vision, like a tech vision.
It'd be weird with his rubber band face.
Exactly. Or his girls just want to have fun attire.
Oh, Captain Lou.
So keyloggers, and then this week also in the news, the WannaCry ransomware case, which affected a lot of Europe.
Well, and we had some weird issues at work too. The internet was not working well for external sites on Tuesday and Wednesday. And luckily, most of my job involves our internal sites, but sometimes I have to go to external sites to find some information, and I just couldn't get to them. It was really buggy all of Tuesday afternoon and most of Wednesday morning. And apparently there was some sort of phishing thing going around. There was a weird email that looked pretty legitimate, and it was telling people that the Outlook web service needed to be updated and to click on this link. And I'm sure a few people clicked on it because it looked pretty legit.
To be honest with you, I used to work where you worked, and the amount of people who are very savvy about these technical issues it's a low amount, unfortunately, right? So there's a high threshold for someone to fall for something.
It is,
like this,
and
right?
I think that's one of the reasons that's preventing us from moving on to Windows 10, because it would be such a difficult process for people to wrap their heads around moving from Windows 7 to Windows 10. I wish we would move to Windows 10 because although it's not Mac OS, it's still way better than Windows 7.
I completely agree with you on that one. Well, speaking of Windows and all things Microsoft, right before the show, actually, I had logged into Facebook to take a look at something, and at the top of the screen, Facebook had asked me if I was willing to take a short survey. And the way that they worded it was very interesting. They're saying like we're asking a small amount of people their views on things. So I thought that was interesting the way that they sort of use the exclusivity angle in order to get people to answer it. So I'm very curious to see what Facebook is up to. So I say sure. And so the first page asked me about a bunch of different things, including Oculus, WhatsApp, Microsoft, Instagram. Do I know of these brands? And the second page asked me if I'd used these brands in the last 30 days. So I haven't used anything Microsoft related in 30 days. So the third through seventh question were about Microsoft. But the weird thing is they were talking about Microsoft as if we're a person. Like, do you think Microsoft is fun? Do you think Microsoft is innovative?
Microsoft fun?
Do you trust Microsoft with your information? And the majority of the time now, I mean, I'm pretty much Mac only these days. I'll use a PC computer once in a while, but it's certainly the exception and not the norm. So the funny thing is just watching Facebook, or Microsoft via Facebook, I guess, asking me these random questions about itself as if it were like a living brand, right?
The survey wasn't from Facebook, it was from Microsoft?
I guess so. Like it used like it was inside the web browser, inside of the Facebook code, but it was asking me questions about Microsoft. So I guess they had paid them on their behalf to do this.
And your last experience with the Microsoft PC wasn't great, right?
Well, I mean, it was a very cheap Lenovo laptop with Windows 10, so I don't mind Windows 10, but it's a very limiting OS for creative people, I guess would be the best way to put it.
And that's another brand that had a bit of a problem with keyloggers and malware pre-installed.
Questionnaire was given in response to some of the criticisms that they had, right? Come up over the past week because Microsoft was saying that they were very angry at the NSA for having this exploit, but they themselves were aware of it and never patched it.
And they had to bring the Windows XP patchers out of retirement and retire and actually patch Windows XP this week. Because Windows XP at this point is a discontinued product that's not getting any patches or anything. They kind of had to go back, and that's where the problem happens. Where I feel where I work, we're behind with Windows 7. But there are places that are still using XP.
Yeah, there are a lot of so-called legacy systems that are still out there that get used very frequently. Like I'll include in the show notes statistics that I found last year, but yeah, overwhelmingly so almost. The number of people using Windows 10 is very minute compared to people using both XP and Vista.
Vista was awful, by the way. I had to help somebody with their Vista computer once, and it was not pleasant at all.
Well, whatever. The only Windows OS for me is 3.1 anyways. Anything else is just...
I'm confused now. Anyway, my wife just got home, so we'll have to take a little break.
Please stand by. Angelo has a family that loves him. Our hosts will be back soon.
Welcome back to the Double Density Podcast. So both you, Angelo, and I have had some issues that have sort of either annoyed us or bothered us this week with some of our texts. So I'm going to let you go first, then I'll get into mine.
So it was more of a little family fun thing that happened. My wife had gone out, and I had the two kids, and it was rainy outside, so we couldn't really do anything outside. Not that I'm a big particular fan of going and play outside, but finally the weather's getting nice, so we usually do that. But it was raining, so we had to get the kids to watch something together on the TV, and that's usually an ordeal. But they decided they both wanted to watch Moana, which we bought on iTunes, on Apple TV. So I set them down. They're ready to watch Moana. Press the play button, and went to the screens. How they work on iTunes, it's basically like you put in a DVD. They still have that whole splash screen where you can choose the featurettes and all that, and those all worked. But we went to press and start the movie. Content not available at this time. Okay. I did the normal thing. I reset the Apple TV, tried to get it to work again. Content not available. And then I noticed that none of my content that of the movies that we bought, not that we have a lot of movies on iTunes, none of them were available. So we switched to Netflix. The little girl went to watch Netflix on the iPad, and he watched it on the Apple TV because there was going to be a fight about what to watch. So they finally agreed on something, and Apple sort of screwed me. And the next day, I thought about it, and I realized, oh, when this happens and a reboot doesn't work, sign out, and then sign back in. And guess what? It worked. And it's funny because that had happened right after I sold my old Apple TV. So maybe that was Apple's way of reprimanding me for not keeping my old Apple TV as some sort of religious relic.
So you brought this on yourself, is what you're saying.
It's my fault.
You didn't do the sign of the Apple that day, did you?
No, I didn't. Yeah, that's a problem.
So mine is a little bit more infuriating and longer lasting. So for a couple of years now, every so often, I get random emails from the UK about services I've signed up for or things I've taken part in. And there's a British Brian Hasty running around signing up for things using my email address. So I got an email this week.
Brian Hasty? Does he say his name like that?
Oh, probably. I mean, I haven't confronted him yet, but I got an email this week from Virgin Media about internet installation in the area. So I don't know how he's going to get his internet, given that I've got an email address, and I also don't know where to send these things to.
Why don't you just ignore them?
Well, I do ignore them, right? But at the same time, it always makes me laugh. Like, the two weirdest things I've gotten were, one was a coupon for a body house.
What?
Because he had been a recent customer with a lady of the night, I guess. And they offered him 10% off his next visit to whatever. And then I also got an email from, it was really weird. It was from another son's father. So I guess the Brian Hasty in the UK has a child about their boys hanging out and going to camp or something, and the worries that they had about the weekend itself and who was going and like watching out what this boy was going to do because he's very dangerous. And so it's this really weird kind of insight into another Brian Hasty that exists.
That's weird. That's really weird.
So generally I ignore them, but in this case, I thought it was kind of funny.
Well, you should forward that father your receipt from the body house and say, look, this is who you're going to hang out with. Are you sure about this?
It was just the weirdest thing. And I mean, I've been getting them since 2012 pretty frequently. So it's either for their version of Hydro-Quebec or their, or this week it's internet installation with Virgin. So who knows? I hope, Brian Hasty, wherever you are, that you get your internet fixed and you start listening to the Double Density podcast. Double Density. We are back, and I would like to begin this segment by saying this is probably the inaugural segment of something I'd like to call Alien Cinema. Because I feel like you and I have talked over the past couple of weeks about several UFO related movies that we've watched or are watching. So the first entry is a film called Alien Abduction from 1989, aka the McPherson tape. So it's a 65-minute found footage film about aliens. It's about this family. It's a birthday party, and suddenly aliens intrude on their evening inn, and it's directed by this guy Dean Aliotto. So I remember seeing this several years ago on YouTube, and we're going to put it up in the show notes in its entirety so you can watch it yourself. But I made Angelo watch it, and it was very interesting to hear your thoughts about it, right?
Well, so the first thing I asked is, when you approached me about this, it was, I guess, later in the evening, and I asked if I should watch it at home now, alone in the dark in my living room. And you recommended I didn't. And I guess I'm glad I didn't, because it is sort of spine-tingling, is the right word. It's even though I realize it's fake at this point, it's still the image of a gray alien, as fleeting as it is in this film, is always creepy to me. I use that word a lot, but that's the only way to describe those gray aliens, when their faces and the bug eyes and their pale skin always sort of freaks me out. And you do see them a bit in this movie, spoiler alert. But I'm glad I watched it during the day on my lunch break. One of the things that I found hard was that it's hard to see, right? It's not the best quality. It is shot in the 80s. And actually, that was my first question to you when I started watching it. I sent you a message asking, is this actually shot in the 80s, or is this recent, or what? And you explained that it was shot in the 80s, right?
Right. So I mean, this goes back. So episode 2, we started talking about found footage films, and so I wanted to, and we talked about the Blair Witch, which was kind of like the watershed moment. But I had remembered, and I wanted to double check and rewatch the film before we got into this. So it was made in 1988 by this guy Dean Aliotto. So basically, what he did is he found a bunch of actors, and he kept rehearsing the movie like a play, and it's shot on consumer grade video cameras, and the effects. Though a little bit cheesy, are very effective for what they do, and I find that you get sucked into the movie very easily. And it doesn't have a lot of the usual sorts of leaps of logic you need to have in found footage movies, like how is this camera still working, like why, blah blah blah. So at one point they ask like, why did you turn the light off on the camera? It's to preserve the battery.
Yeah, that's kind of smart.
Sorry, not the camera, but the light on the camera, right? So
Yeah.
I thought there was a lot of interesting ways in which they addressed a lot of the issues here.
And it started off pretty mundane, silly questions and banter between the family members. And then they went out and what was the reason they went out? I can't remember. Did they see a light outside? Something landed
Yeah,
or something?
they saw
right?
light and heard some noises.
So they went out and then they saw the whole thing with the spaceship, which knowing it's fake, it was kind of funny, but I can see myself as one of those UFO convention goers back in the day seeing this and thinking it was real. And there's a reason for that too, right? That you'll probably explain after. But the thing that really got to me though is after they saw these aliens, they came back. And is that when they decided to just have cake still?
Yeah, have cake and play. I think it was cards.
Play
or a board
cards
game.
and sing and dance and play the piano, I think is what the grandma said to do.
Right. I mean, I understand where they were going with that, and I mean, like, if they tried to dismiss the lights as nothing, right, and trying to go back to the party, but you as the viewer knew that there was much more going on than that.
Well, yeah, because the guy, they dismissed the lights as nothing, but they saw 3 aliens like hanging out and pulling an ET and collecting flowers and stuff. And then they showed up at the house.
Right. So that's the sort of the end game is when they come in, all the lights get cut, and they proceed to grab these people.
Well, that was at the end, right? But at one point they shoot an alien, right? And they pick up the dead alien body and put him in the room.
Exactly.
So who played the aliens? Do you know?
Children, actually.
Huh.
So there's 3. So let's. What I feel like I'll get into the story right now, right? So the movie was originally shot, conceived, edited, etc., and was bought by a distributor. What had happened is that this movie was completed in 1988. Everything was great, and then there was a warehouse fire at the distributor's warehouse, and only a few copies of the movie made it out the door, and no chains. It was all mom and pop independent stores. So then some industrious individual cut off the beginning and the end of the tape where there was credits and an explanation, and then that copy was the one that was like widely shared everywhere, including UFO conventions. So a lot of people in the early 90s were viewing this for the first time, and a lot of people, including a retired Army lieutenant, I think, testified to its veracity, which I think is very interesting because it is obviously indeed a hoax. But I mean, back then you didn't have the internet. The internet was in its infancy, but you didn't really have a lot of ways in which you can check this out to see how authentic it is, right?
Yeah, and there we go back to the whole trying to put your trust in a trained observer, whether the guy's from the military or not. He can be fooled like anyone else. Just how scientists can be fooled by people claiming they have ESP or whatever, and they're just using magic tricks.
I am always into filmmakers who make a lot out of a little, and I feel like this is very much the case of that, right?
It's really impressive, and it's the earliest that I can understand of any found footage type movie, over 10 years before the Blair Witch Project, right? And
right.
It's pretty effective because without those credits, and like I said before, if you're at a convention and you want to believe that there's aliens, you see this and it looks real.
So even more ridiculous than that, though. So Dean was given the chance to remake this film. So the film was remade for the UPN network, which is a Paramount network, in 1988 as Alien Abduction Incident in Lake County. It was a more dramatic retelling of the same story, more theatrical, etc. And people still thought it was real after it aired multiple times on UPN, despite there being credits.
Yeah, so that was presented as a movie, not...
Right, like one of those Unsolved Mysteries reenactment style films, feature-length films.
And did people think it was a reenactment of a true event, or an actual true event that was caught on tape.
People actually believed. So this is where my love of vintage Coast to Coast AM / Art Bell comes in. So I unknowingly had listened to an episode a couple of weeks ago that went in depth into this, and so they opened up the lines, and people were calling, swearing that it was the real thing, that UPN had somehow ended up with these tapes, and if not, then UPN was trying to hoodwink the public into thinking this was real, despite the fact that there were commercials, despite the fact that there were credits both at the beginning and the end. So I don't see how the network was lying to its viewers about what this was.
It's so funny that these things happen, right? That they get so wrapped up in the idea that this can be real, and they don't even take a second to think about what's actually happening and what they're looking at critically, right? It's just right away, let's believe what they tell us. And to a certain extent, we see that today, right? Still with all the garbage you can see on Facebook that people post thinking is real. This is another extreme, right? There's no message here or anything. It's just, let's think these are real aliens that are being carried around inside a house, and at the end they come and abduct the whole family.
I also think it's, the tagline for the X-Files rings very true, right? Like, I want to believe.
Exactly.
So it's easy to look at these things and see, like, and point to it and go, there's proof. And so, like, 30 years ago now, I guess,
wow,
when Alien Abduction first came out, the problem was being unable to verify the authenticity of the source, right?
Exactly, and that's what I was saying before, is that if you're, number one, you're at a UFO convention, you want to believe, and even if you're a more skeptical UFO believer, which is at the height of me wanting to believe in UFOs, I was still highly skeptical, like not as much as I am now, but I was still, cautiously optimistic that maybe the stuff was happening, but even at that, I was pretty skeptical. If you have no way of kind of researching all this, it's not like you're going to be going to a library and looking things up on microfiche. Now it's kind of easy to just go online, and you have so many resources available. The thing that still blows my mind, though, is even now, with all the resources available to us, I'm sure there's some people out there that think it's real. Like, just go. We're going to put the link of the YouTube video in our show notes, but just go and peruse the comments. Just look at them. And some of them there will like insist that this is still real.
So I think further to that, we live in a really interesting time, right? Where, like, it's a lot easier to verify information, but it's also easier to fake evidence, right? With things like Photoshop and After Effects and visual modelers, right? Like, so it's easier to create a lot of different, remarkably real pieces of media that involve the paranormal.
Yeah, and that made me think of that video that came out, I guess, almost 10 years ago at this point, of those UFOs flying over Haiti. Remember that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I'll put a link of that in the show notes. But those look quite real. It still looks pretty impressive now, 10 years later. So you can imagine what we can do now with just even on just an iPad, you can do amazing stuff.
I remember about 10 years ago, and I've talked about sort of visiting the above top secret forums, but 10 years ago, Linda Moulton Howe's Earth Files was reporting of a similar video to the Haiti video, right? Where it's just these figures in the sky are moving around, and oh my gosh, it looks real. And it clearly wasn't. You can very easily sort of rationally tell yourself, like, it's the work of a couple of people or just a person spending time with 3D modelers, just creating things for a number of reasons, like shadows weren't falling the wrong way, et cetera, et cetera. And it was this really weird thing where she kept propagating this storyline that was clearly fake. But I mean, that's kind of the entirety of most of her career beyond her local reporting in the early 80s, right?
Yeah, she's one that really wants to get this out there to think. Isn't she really big into cattle mutilations?
Yes, absolutely. She's followed that. She also apparently claimed in the early days she was shown a secret briefing paper. I think it was a presidential briefing paper that revealed how extraterrestrials, so ETs, created Jesus.
Well, yeah. Well, of course. Was there any doubt?
Well, I'm making the sign of the apple right now.
Mentioning that other video, the one you just said there about from Linda Moulton Howe, there was also that Jerusalem video a while ago that everybody was freaking out over because it was from multiple angles, but every time I saw it, there was really nothing interesting to it at all. Or is it just me?
No, I agree with you.
There was really nothing to it.
I definitely agree with you. I mean, like, if you go back to, for example, if you go back to the 40s, right, where it was the quote-unquote the Battle of Los Angeles in 1942.
That one's fun.
That honestly, I'm not sure what that is. I'm very interested in finding out the truth if it ever gets revealed, because a lot of people say it's ETs, but I mean it was wartime, right? So who knows exactly what it was, or if it was someone testing things, if it was the Japanese. But there's a lot of people who claim that it is extraterrestrial in nature, and there is some film to back that up, right? So it was harder back then to fake something, whereas today I can sit down and probably in like I'd say like a full day and a half's worth of work, I can give you like a pretty convincing like 10-second bit of video.
Well, there's a photo of the Battle of Los Angeles, and going to that thing where you were talking about, what did you call this segment again?
Alien cinema.
Yeah, there I was trying to watch, and I say trying because it was I gave up. But there's this whole series on Netflix about unsealed alien files. It's pretty terrible, but the last episode I watched, I think I got 4 episodes in, was about aliens in Los Angeles and the Battle of LA, and how it could. The military said it was actually a balloon, but there was no way it could be a balloon because they kept shooting at it. And the photo they took of it, it really looks like it's a UFO, right? The classic dome-shaped flying saucer is caught in the lights, and they're shooting at it, right? You've seen the classic picture of it, right?
Yeah, for sure. The one with all the lights sort of like pivoted onto it.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool picture, actually. I think it's probably the lights just hitting smoke in the right way, but because they think they went hysterical and just started shooting and shooting and shooting, and at one point they were just shooting in the air, right? And all the smoke that the guns were creating made all these billowing clouds of smoke, and the lights, the spotlights that they were shining on it, crossed each other perfectly and created that image. Is what I think it actually is. Taking
a step back though, about this, do you have a favorite shape of UFO? Like, are you one of those cigar-shaped people?
Yes, it's actually that one.
So the classic saucer style?
Yeah, I love that. It's that one, and the one, I think it ended up being like a hubcap being thrown, but it's the one with the 3 sort of balls underneath.
And then
it's on the cover of those, I don't know if you remember them, what they were called. They were those books when we were kids, well, when I was a kid anyway, of so it's my favorite shape is, like I was saying, the one from the Battle of LA, but it's also the UFO on the cover of the World of the Unknown children's books about UFOs, and there's also one about ghosts and stuff. I loved those books when I was a kid. So these are from, I guess they might have been from the late 70s, early 80s, and I used to take them out of the library. They were the most popular books in our little tiny elementary school library.
So the French version of that was available to me at my elementary school library. Do you feel like children are being indoctrinated, like children of a certain time are being indoctrinated by these things?
Well, the thing is that now I seriously doubt that this book would be in my child's library. Like, I find when I was a kid growing up, people were a lot less careful about what books were available to children. Like, there's no way, I've said this before about a lot of stuff, but there's no way I would have let my kid look at these books. She'd have nightmares. But I was looking at these in grade 1 and 2. I remember a friend of mine and I had come up with this whole unified theory that connected the Bermuda Triangle to the Loch Ness Monster, to UFOs, to ghosts. I can't remember what the unified theory was at this point, but it was really sound, I think, for a 12-year-old.
So to finish things off, how many little green men would you give the UFO abduction movie?
What's the scale?
One green man to 5 green men.
I'll give it a solid 3 because there were actually 3 little gray men in the movie.
Great. I'm going to give it a 4 because it was realistic, it was logical, it was well executed for what it was. It did not stretch beyond its means, and it was just the right length, right? So 65 minutes. I felt like it was a really good move to do.
I'd like to give it a bonus reptoid, as it being one of the earliest forms of found footage.
I will accept that. I will also add the reptoid in with a winking face.
Oh.
A winking reptoid for 1989's UFO Abduction. Alien Cinema. Welcome back to Double Density, and we would like to take a moment right now to sort of sit and think and ponder and reflect upon one of the great scientific milestones of the 1960s, one of the bigger scientific achievements that is still in usage today. Its usage is ubiquitous, from everything from CDs to DVDs to fixing your eyes. And what, of course, we're talking about is lasers. So on May 16th, 1960, Theodore Maiman, as part of Hughes Laboratory research, successfully demonstrated a pink ruby-colored laser that transmitted information.
And now we use them to play with our cats.
We use them for everything. We use them to watch movies. We use them to fix our eyes. We use them in the construction of buildings. Hell, I mean, look at Insane Clown Posse. They don't know how magnets work. Do you think they know how lasers work?
I'm sure they could figure it out if they wrote a song about it.
I'm hoping they do. Anyways, we would just like to shout out Theodore Maiman, Hughes Laboratory Research. Thank you for inventing the laser. Double density. So this has been episode 5 of the Double Density Podcast. If you'd like to hit us up, of course, you can do that on Twitter. So we are on Twitter at double_density. You can find our Facebook page by either searching Facebook for the words Double Density Podcast, or you can go to facebook.com/Double Density Podcast, one word. You can also find us on Instagram at Double Density Podcast, one word. We're on all the major podcasting sites, right? So iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, etc., etc. So if you can and you are subscribed to us via YouTube, iTunes, please leave us a review, or hell, even just leave us a recipe. We'd be more than happy to see a recipe under our review portion on iTunes podcast.
I think we'd cook it and eat it on air.
We would definitely do a mukbang episode.
All right. We'd have to do that in person, though.
I mean, we're already well on our way to planning this in-person kind of thing, right? So I feel like mukbang is the next logical step for the Double Density Podcast. So once again, this has been episode 5 with your hosts, Brian and Angelo. And tune in next week as I describe my favorite Halloween movies in reverse order.
See ya.
Bye!
Well, I held that for a while.